A lot of characters in Tekken 6 sucked. Not how you thought I would open a video called The Broken Top Tiers of Tekken 6, huh? You see, the highly anticipated console release of Tekken 6, commonly known as Tekken 6 Bloodline Rebellion, had a lot to prove. This was because the prior installment, Tekken 5, was the most successful Tekken game at that time, and honestly blasted the series off to new heights. Despite all of this, it was kind of a balancing nightmare. Tons of characters had game-breaking stuff that makes even the worst offenders in Tekken 8 seem mild in comparison. The game had infinites, sometimes only at the wall, and sometimes outside of the wall, where you could take 200 damage in one combo, in a game with 140 health. 10-frame punishes would sometimes do half-life, some characters still had 8-frame jabs, the game just had so many balancing issues. Even after the patched version of the game, Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection was released, the characters were incredibly strong. Coming into the full console release of Tekken 6, Bandai Namco learned quite a lot from Tekken 5 and the prior arcade-only version of Tekken 6. In this full console release, almost every character was nerfed pretty significantly, and by the time we actually got our hands on the game at home, it was clear this was a very different Tekken game than what came before it. The average character in Tekken 6 was significantly weaker than both their Tekken 5 predecessor and what would be their future Tekken 7 and Tekken 8 iterations. In addition to this, the core gameplay was actually slowed down pretty significantly. 8-frame jabs were removed, and sidesteps and backdashes were nerfed, leading to a lot more sluggish movement. Character health was also increased, going from 145 to 180 universally, serving to make matches last even longer. If that wasn't enough, combos were doubled in length with the addition of the brand new bound system. Before, you would launch your opponent into the air, get a couple more hits before they fell down, and then the combo would be over. But bounds added a whole new dimension to this. It was basically 2 combos in one. In addition to the bound system, wall combos were made into a universal mechanic. Prior to Tekken 6, not every single character had a standard wall combo. There were characters who would only get 1 hit or so after splatting you against the wall. But here, almost everyone would get multiple extra hits. Pretty big changes, right? In Tekken 6, we also saw Tekken's very first comeback mechanic with the introduction of Rage, giving a big damage increase whenever you were low on HP, allowing for, you guessed it, way more comebacks and thus even longer matches. While characters were slower and weaker in Tekken 6, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean there weren't top tiers. A lot of what makes modern Tekken characters strong today actually kind of got their start in this game. The whole term of modern Tekken characters kind of originated in this game, with the newcomers in the series being Lars and Bob. They weren't game-breaking, they didn't have special mechanics, no. These were really some of the first exceptionally easy characters who, instead of using large move lists, would use a couple small moves that just did everything. You could pick up these characters very easily and immediately see success using only a couple of attacks, provided you are a strong fundamental player, of course. This archetype of character continued going into Tekken 7, and of course in Tekken 8. Don't get it twisted though, there were still plenty of hyper difficult top tiers who served to only reward the most executionally and technical players on the planet. Both extremes were actually here and accounted for, and we're going to be looking at all of that in today's video, where we'll go over the most defining top tiers in Tekken 6's competitive life. There's so much to talk about, so this is going to be a long one. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing me cover more Tekken games in the future, and let's get right into it. Lars Alexanderson was a brand new character introduced in this game, being the illegitimate son of Heihachi Mishima himself, and by extension, the half-brother of Kazuya. Lars was positioned as the new face of Tekken during this time, being the protagonist in the game's story mode. Despite being part of the Mishima family, Lars really does not play like a Mishima. He was designed around being an incredibly easy and all-around character. So, basically, the exact opposite of all the other Mishimas in the game. He was also amazing in Tekken 6. The combination of being very easy to pick up and play, while also being one of the most effective characters in the game, made him incredibly popular. He was everywhere in both tournaments and in online play. leading to an era where Lars was very hated amongst the general community. Who are we kidding? He still is. Lars dominated Tekken as a broken top tier for 8 years, from the release of Tekken 6 throughout the life of not only that game, but also the entirety of Tekken Tag 2's life, until he finally paid for his sins in the console release of Tekken 7, where he was pretty heavily nerfed. While today, Lars is known for being a character who's all about stances and transitioning from one to the other, he was actually much more simple back in these days, playing a pretty fundamental game of Tekken, just exceptionally privileged Tekken. Like I said before, he was designed around pretty much every strength you could want in a character, with his only true weakness being his lack of safe lows, but more on that later. Everything you could want in a character was just here. Damage? Oh, you bet. Lars had godly damage, some of the absolute best in the game, which combined with his top tier wall travel meant that if he hit you with one single launcher, you are most likely going to get comboed to the wall, no matter where you were. And once you hit the wall, you would have to take his classic wall combo, which at this point was by far the best wall combo we had ever seen in Tekken. Having good wall combos in Tekken 6 was more important than ever, not only because, like I mentioned earlier, this was the first game to more or less standardize wall combos amongst all characters, but because this game allowed for a bound at the wall. This inherently makes walls way more scary. In Tekken, you've pretty much always been at a disadvantage when your back is against the wall, mainly just because you're unable to backdash, your movement is super limited. But this game made the threat of getting wall splatted significantly higher. Sometimes you would take half life from a 12-frame punish because of this mechanic, and Lars absolutely loved it. Lars loved the newly added bound system in general, with his various very strong bound options and combos. Okay, but if he's so all around, surely there's more than just his combo damage and his pressure at the wall. Well, yes, there is. Lars had tools for every possible situation. Poking was considered very important in Tekken 6, and of course, Lars had some of the best pokes the game had to offer. And this, combined with the fact that literally everything tracked on Lars, meant you could not effectively sidestep his pokes. His standard 1-2 string tracked to both sides for some reason, because I guess why not? New character privilege, right? His down back 2-1 was a completely safe mid-mid string, it also tracked in this game. And he of course had his most commonly used homing poke today, his back 1. All of these moves served to shut down sidesteps so effectively, meaning when he was in your face, he could glue your opponent down, creating very, very safe pressure, taking almost no risk of his own, and forcing you to stand still. If you know anything about Tekken poking, you know that the generic down forward 1 13-frame mid poke is arguably the second most important move in the game, behind jabs. Almost every character has one of these, and it serves as an amazing, quick, low-risk, low-reward option to create momentum and check your opponent so they don't try and duck your jabs. And Lars's down forward 1 was arguably the best in the game. Only -1 on block, meaning you lose almost no momentum when your opponent blocks it. Unless your opponent wants to go for a risky callout, you usually could keep your pressure going after they blocked a down forward 1. It was also +5 on hit, which is quite high for a down forward 1. It had very good range, and get this, crushed highs. See how he ducks down during this animation? This would crush jabs. While it didn't technically have the full high crush property, where you would immediately evade all high moves, but it had way more than any other move like this had, which was incredibly important. If you think of a general poking phase in Tekken, what are people throwing out? Jabs and down forward 1s, and if one of your tools intrinsically beats the other, you're creating this really, really weird rock, paper, scissors situation that is not fun for the defender. This is supposed to be a low-risk, low-reward option, so letting you crush a jab with a safe option that, again, has pretty much no risk or negative incentive is kind of ridiculous. And of course, Lars also had a great jab, because of course he did. Great range on this thing. Okay, so his poking's good, but we haven't even talked about this true star of the show in Lars. One of the best moves in the game, Power Spike. This attack terrorized people during Tekken 6 and Tekken Tag 2, before its complete removal in Tekken 7. Power Spike was a down forward 2, 15 frame, standing counter hit launching mid. 15 frames, only 1 frame slower than Kazuya's Abolishing Fist, which comparatively is -14. This one gets to be safe, and what does it also get? High Crush, because why not? Why shouldn't a 15 frame safe mid counter hit launcher also beat highs? And worst of all, this move tracked to his weak side in this game. But let's be real, it's not like you were stepping Lars in Tekken 6 anyway. This move just had so many overpowered properties. You did not ever want to press into this guy, so people would just spam this move constantly, in ranked and tournament. If you happen to get caught by a power spike, you are taking 100 plus damage from his insane combos. It really wasn't worth the risk. Lars would also threaten counter hits when approaching with the forward 1+2, with a safe on block approaching mid that also counter hit launched. The same as today, this move has no tracking, so you can sidestep it, but remember, it's a forward input. Any inputs that involve a forward mean there's always going to be some realigning, making sidestepping it a lot more difficult. So pretty damn good counter hit utility on Lars. But in addition to this, he also had one of the best sidesteps in the game. This was a strength that was arguably more valuable here than it ever had been before, because most of the sidesteps were heavily nerfed in this game. Having a really good one would put you miles ahead of the other characters. But what is the point of sidesteps if we don't have great whiff punishers to punish our opponents? Don't worry, Lars has those too. Lars brought out the signature Mishima Electric Sparks in his forward 1+2, the Arc Blast, being his 15 frame launcher, and a great tool to catch your opponent's whiffs. It had quite a bit more range in this game than it would have in later installments and in Tekken 8 like today, which is a pretty big deal. He also had his iconic back 3-4, being the same long-range 40 damage whiff punisher he has today. He had a Bryan-style orbital with all of its incredible defensive properties, of course being a normal hit launcher, it's safe on block, and incredibly evasive, immediately dodging any lows and sometimes even mids that your opponent tried to press at you. And this is just the start. Lars absolutely loved evasion. Tekken 6 was the first game where characters started getting EXDPs. If you don't play Street Fighter, this might sound like gibberish as far as you're concerned, but this term basically means a completely invincible reversal option, usually evading at frame 1 or something close to it, but being very risky on block. Extremely high risk, but high reward. Well, Lars actually basically had one of these in his up forward 3, the Lightning Screw. And this move, along with the newly introduced Devil Jin Samsara, terrorized online play. It was a complete turn stealer. If your opponent was plus and you knew they would continue their pressure, just throw it out, steal their turn, and get like an 100 damage combo for your trouble. Pretty crazy option to add to a character like Lars' arsenal, considering what he already had. But in general, this was a whole new phase for Tekken. We had never seen stuff like this before. If you like get out of jail free cards, there's even more. His down back 1+2 was a backswing blow with full evasion. He basically disappears almost instantly and runs back, and if your opponent decided to press, you get a counter hit launch for your trouble. Oh yeah, and while the Lightning Screw was very risky, being launch punishable on block, this move was only -10, so very little risk for what you're getting. I hope you're starting to see now what a complete character Lars was in Tekken 6, and we haven't even gotten to his amazing punishment yet. Lars had a 14 frame standing launcher, which is a very rare quality in a character, with the standard launch punish being 15 frames. I know a lot of people who watch my channel don't know frame data, but there's a lot of moves in this game that are -14 on block. It's actually really common, so being able to launch your opponent for a full combo 1 frame faster than most other characters is a big deal. He also had a 12 frame punisher that wall splat for ridiculous damage, and while these two were really the standouts, everything else was pretty solid. He could still launch lows at -15, so unlike other characters where usually they'll have a super fast either standing or low launcher, but their other one will be slower to compensate, Lars really didn't have to deal with that. Great punishment across the board. I mentioned it earlier, but the only thing that wasn't really here is the lows. While Lars' lows have never been bad, they've always lacked safety. Having a quick plus-on-hit low poke that's relatively safe on block, like Kazuya's down back 4 for example, is an amazing addition to a character's neutral. It allows you to open up guards without putting yourself in major risk, and a lot of these moves have pretty big rewards on counter hit, giving you a ton of plus frames to work with. Lars does not have an option like this. His only safe-ish poke is his full crouch 1+2, which is a nice -12 on block. That's pretty good. It also does quite good damage, but the problem with this move is it's locked behind crouch. Anytime a low is either locked behind crouch, a sidestep, or some other stance, it's going to be a lot more limited than if you can just throw it out in the neutral. And it's also a lot easier for your opponents to see coming. So we didn't have great safe low pokes, but if you wanted power lows, Lars had them, absolutely. The iconic down back 4 was, and still is today, a fully high crushing low. He instantly evades all highs and does really good damage on normal hit, while leaving Lars at a good plus frame advantage. Just like today, this move is still a counter hit launcher, although it was significantly worse in Tekken 6, as it always left your opponent back-turned whenever you hit it, pretty heavily reducing the amount of combo damage you could get. It also has essentially full tracking, so you're not sidestepping it, but it does come with the risk of being launch punishable. He also had a Hell Sweep, but it was kind of nothing like the other Mishima Hell Sweeps, just a very distinctive move, but it did a ton of damage in this game. Of course, it was very risky, so people wouldn't really use it that much. At least for the down back 4, you're getting extra utility for the risk, right? You're crushing highs, and you're potentially counter hit launching. It wasn't really worth going for the Hell Sweep, because you just don't really get much. So, while yes, lows were definitely one of his weaknesses, it wasn't enough to hold him back, and Lars remained top 2 in this game, which just goes to show how much he really had as a character. We didn't even talk about his stances yet. While they weren't nearly as important back in these days as they are today, they served to make Lars even simpler to use, giving him built-in movement. He could press forward 3 at any time to go into his dynamic entry stance, closing a ton of distance. Who needs a wave dash when you have this? In this game, he could immediately threaten you with a safe mid counter hit launcher, he had a high poke, he had a throw, and he also had a very interesting normal hit mid launcher called Mjolnir, a really cool move that we haven't seen again since this game. He could also of course cancel this dynamic entry stance whenever he wanted, which was very useful. Lars just had so much in this game, and was an easy top tier pick that offered reliability above all else. You really just couldn't go wrong with him. If you wanted to win as easily as possible in a tournament setting, the only real question you had to ask yourself was, should I play Lars, or should I play Bob?
Filled with a series of television and magazine interviews.
Can I only be 150 pounds? No!
Robert Richards, known as Bob, was another newly added character in Tekken 6, being a world-renowned martial arts prodigy from... can you take a guess where this character is from? Of course, it is America. USA, baby. Bob, despite being fat, is actually an incredibly fast fighter, and just like Lars, had ridiculous new character privilege. Bob was most commonly cited as the best character in this game, though opinions sometimes vary a little bit these days. Even so, he was incredibly easy to use, and more all around than even the king himself, Lars. While Lars might have struggled with unsafe lows, that was something you would never have to worry about with Bob. So how did this guy play? Well, Bob was actually designed to play like a pseudo-Mishima. Despite Lars actually being related to the Mishimas and Bob having no connection, he was funnily enough far more of a Mishima than Lars was. And Bob far outshined all the other true Mishimas in this game, so on a technicality, Bob is the best Mishima in Tekken 6, and in Tekken Tag 2. He had a wave dash, serving to give him great pressure and allowing him to realign with his opponents during his 50-50, which is one of the main use of wave dash. Every time you do a wave dash, you realign to your opponents, preventing them from sidestepping your moves. Bob also had the Mishima Flash Punch combo, being an excellent 10-frame punish. He had the best Hell Sweep in the game, having ridiculous range and being fully homing unlike some of the other Mishima Hell Sweeps. And he had an electric? Oh wait, I'm sorry, not an electric, long washer? Is that French? Who comes up with these names? Anyway, this is an electric in all ways but one. It's a very fast, normal hit launching high, which was amazing for whiff punishing. It wasn't plus on block like the Mishima electrics, but it was still safe at -6, unlike a lot of other similar moves. A lot of people think of Armor King's Dark Upper as a pseudo-electric move, but this move was -10 on block. Bob's got to be safe, which is very, very privileged. This was really an incredible move. It serves so many situations. If any character gets an electric type move, they're always going to be significantly better off for it. This, alongside his incredible Hell Sweep we mentioned earlier, made his wave dash a big threat that you always wanted to duck. At least he doesn't have any mids. Wait, did this guy just do a Shoryuken? Yeah, Bob had an evasive mid Shoryuken launcher out of his wave dash. Okay, that's a little weird considering the type of character he is, but this is actually just the beginning. Bob in this game, and in Tag 2, was actually known for his incredible evasion. Yes, the biggest character in this game is somehow one of the most evasive. Just like Lars, he had an instant evasion backswing blow, and a lot of other really dumb evasive tools. A safe, fully evasive mid-launcher, yep, an unsafe but incredibly fast fully evasive normal hit launcher, and he even had one of the best sidestep moves in the game in his 1+2, which was an amazing tool for whiff punishing and creating pressure, and of course evading your opponent's attacks. He has moves where he'll evade lows, moves where he'll evade highs, just all kinds of weird evasion that's very, very out of character. Bob just had everything a Tekken character could ever really want at this time. He had the best poking in the game, bar none. One of the longest reaching jabs, and a down forward one that tracks to his weak side, because why not? Bob was littered with safe on block mid-mid strings. A general rule for old school Tekken was that most strings would either be safe on block but end with a high so you can duck it, or would end with a mid that you couldn't duck but would leave your opponent pretty unsafe. Bob didn't have to follow these rules. He had down 2-1, which was a huge range safe on block mid-mid. If your opponent didn't respect it, he actually had a mid follow-up that wall splats, and this was used all the time. If your opponent didn't respect that follow-up, we have another mid follow-up that also wall splats. This was one of the best poke strings in the entire game. You just had so many extra hits to add on to throw your opponent off, and reacting to this was very difficult. Back 1-2 was a great safe mid-mid string, his full crouch down forward 2-1 was another safe mid-mid string. He just had so many of these. Tons of other good poking stuff too, like his 2-1 string, which also had a low follow-up if you wanted to catch your opponent off guard. And there are honestly so many viable strings on this character that it would take me way too long to mention all of them. But the general approach on Bob was condition your opponent just by using the first 2 hits of most safe strings, and then when they're not expecting it, add in follow-ups. And if they are expecting it, add in even more follow-ups and hope you catch them off guard. A lot of the time you will, especially in online play. The prevalence of Bob's strings made him, to a lot of people, one of the most cheesy and gimmicky characters in the game. If there's one thing the average Tekken player does not like, it's strings like this. But okay, we've talked about strings and poking. What about the neutral? Well, Bob had arguably one of the best neutral moves in the entire game. Coupe Chop? Coupe Chop? What is with these move names? Is Bob secretly French? This is a great range mid that does 21 damage and is +7 on hit, leaving your opponent in crouch, basically forcing them to stand still after it connects. And on counter hit, it would knock down for a guaranteed follow-up. But surely Bob at least would give up his turn if this move was blocked, right? When Bob returned in Tekken 7, this move would actually give a jab punish if blocked. It was -10. Pretty reasonable, right? Well, here in Tekken 6, this move was safe on block. It wasn't safe on block as in -8 or -9. You know, there's plenty of safe moves where you give up your turn. And it wasn't even safe on block like -1, which is usually the block data of some of the best pokes in the series. This move was neutral on block. Again, if you aren't too into competitive Tekken or frame data, you probably aren't going to see why this is a huge deal, but just basically, this allows him to poke and pressure from a huge range without losing even 1% of his momentum. It is 0 on block. Neither players are at an advantage. And for a move like this is absolutely ridiculous. So just like Lars' down forward 2 that we mentioned earlier, this was Bob's spammable move. It was actually even more spammable because of how much better of a move it was. If you watched Pro Bobs in Tekken 6, this move would make up like 60% of the moves they used. Why risk using a mid in your 50-50 that, God forbid, will give up your turn if it's blocked? Why would you ever do that? You can just use this move. If your opponent presses into it, you get a huge reward. If it hits them normally, you get major plus frames. And if it's blocked, nothing happens. So yeah, a lot of Bobs would just 50-50 with the huge hell sweep or this simple mid. It was insanely overtuned. Arguably the best move in the game, although there are some other contenders we'll talk about later. And this mid, coupled with his sidestep 1+2, gave him an even greater neutral than he already had. He also had a Demon Paw type attack, because why not, I guess? But let's talk about the lows, because this was where Lars was kind of lacking. Bob had some of the best lows in the game. We've mentioned the Hell Sweep already, it's amazing, crazy damage, great range. Why does he have a better Hell Sweep than the best Mishimas? But what if we want these safer lows we talked about earlier? Well, he had plenty of them. Down back 3, a great range, 18 damage low poke that was +2 on hit, only -12 on block, low risk. If you wanted the high crush, we have down back 4, crazy range, evades all highs, and only -12 on block. It's actually pretty rare for a character to have lots of -12 on block lows. Usually a character will either have none, or they'll have one low that is particularly designed around only being -12. But Bob gets privilege. This down back 4 we mentioned is actually even more annoying than I made it sound. If you press down back 4-4, you would get a mid after the low kick, which was actually guaranteed on counter hit, doing 40 damage, but was -11 on block, so you would be punished. This, however, didn't even matter, because if you thought your opponent would try and punish it, we have like 20 other follow-ups to try and make them guess. High follow-up to make the whole string safe on block, another mid follow-up after that high, or another low after the mid. Even I'm getting confused, there's so many follow-ups on these moves to keep your opponents guessing. Did he really need all of this from a high crushing -12 low poke? His normal down 4 was a great low as well. It's just everything you would ever need in a good low attack, Bob would have. And if these lows weren't enough to make your opponent duck, well, he also had a launching throw, one of the only characters to have this back then. And because throws were significantly more difficult to break in this game compared to how they are today, this threat was always looming. Bobs would throw this move out all the time. Even if their opponent would break it every time, just showing your opponent in a competitive environment that you're willing to go for a launching throw means they always have to keep it in the back of their mind, thus limiting their other options. Tekken 6 was a pretty balanced game, so even despite all this, Bob did actually have one core weakness, just like Lars did. God forbid, a single weakness. He was designed around not being able to launch blocked attacks that were -15, like most of the roster. He had a pretty standard 15 frame down forward too, but this only launched on counter hits. He couldn't launch his opponent for a combo until 18 frames with his down back 1+2. Theoretically, if you were a Mishima god, you could technically get his electric to come out as early as 16 frames, but this was ridiculously difficult. And let's be honest, if you were an execution god like that, you probably weren't spending your time playing Bob. Most Bobs would just go for his up forward 1+2 to punish big unsafe moves, being a 16 frame, 50 damage attack, which is nice, but it's a far fetch from a normal launcher that would lead to 100 damage combos, so this is absolutely a weakness of his. He did however make up for this a little bit with all of his other punishment, which was exceptionally strong. We mentioned the Mishima Flash Punch combo, which was excellent, and he also had the longest range 12 frame punisher in the game. The legendary forward 2-3 was a 40 damage knockdown and wall splat punish. Really awesome option. While you struggled to launch standing attacks, if he blocked your low, he was pretty privileged, being able to launch you at 14 frames. In my opinion, being able to launch lows on block is actually a lot more important than launching mids, as people are willing to throw out a lot more risky lows than super unsafe risky mids on your block. So he's not even lacking that much, and a 14 frame while standing punish is very, very good. So yeah, besides lacking a strong standing punisher, everything you could really want in a character was here and accounted for, making him of course a very popular pick in tournaments. By the end of this game's lifetime, people were sick and tired of Bob because of how often you would see him. There were grand finals of big tournaments where both players were playing Bob. This wasn't uncommon at all, which absolutely hurt the competitive reputation of this game. And it didn't help that after Tekken 6, Bob was still godly in Tag 2, being borderline broken because of a bug that allowed him to reset combos when he was tagged in. Just like Lars, Bob paid for his sins in Tekken 7 and got nerfed pretty hard, and we haven't seen him again since that game. Part of me wonders if we'll ever see him again in Tekken 8. I don't think Bob was a particularly well-liked character, and as soon as he wasn't super broken in a tournament setting, it seems like almost every Bob player dropped him and moved on, making his play rates very low in Tekken 7. If we do see him again, I think the Tekken devs are going to have to rework his gameplay pretty significantly, but that's a topic for another day. Bob and Lars were very, very dominant, and in a lot of people's eyes, started a whole new era of Tekken characters. The all-around, easy-to-use, modern Tekken gameplay design. So let's look at a character who is the exact opposite.
Three-way split, just like we promised.
The experience alone was reward enough. You two can split it amongst yourselves. See you around.
Man,
Thanks, Steve!
he's a great guy.
Cheers! It's all ours!
Steve Fox, one of the most popular characters in the Tekken series, was hot off his monstrous run in Tekken 5. where he was arguably the most broken character in Tekken history. He got nerfed in the game's updated version, Tekken 5 DR, but was still comfortably a top tier. And despite getting even more nerfs coming into Tekken 6, he was still a very strong top tier. In Tekken 6, Steve had two core issues, and everything else was just godly. The first weakness was his horrible punishments. Bob players complaining about them having bad punishment would be laughed at by Steve players. Steve couldn't launch until 19 frames when blocking mids, and unlike Bob, who would make up for that with a good crouching launcher for blocking lows, Steve did not. He also couldn't launch lows that he blocked until 19 frames. Though he did have the iconic Wild Man, acting as a very strong 36 damage 11 frame while standing punish. This was good, but again, if you can't launch lows until -19, you're going to be at a very severe disadvantage. His other standing punishers really were not good either. Steve's 112 wasn't that great in this game. It did 30 damage, but no knockdown and only +3. Pretty horrible start for our boy here. The second weakness was his lows. Steve is always designed around having weak lows. He is a boxer after all, but they were even worse than they normally are in this game. One of his best low pokes today, his full crouch down forward 1, didn't exist yet, meaning the only way for him to get a move like this was going into his peekaboo stance. His down 2 knocked down on normal hit, which was nice, but it was very slow and launch punishable in this game. The same could be said for his peekaboo down 2, and his down back 3-1 was as risky as it's always been. Except for the fact that you could get a full combo from this unseeable low at the wall, provided you had a decent angle and very good execution. And with that, this seems like the perfect segue to start talking about what made Steve godly. Steve had the highest combo damage out of any top tier, being able to pretty consistently get around 120 damage from a single counter hit if he had the wall. That's almost 70% life. And this wouldn't be as meaningful if you didn't have by far the best counter hit launchers in the game. No one else came close. Back 1 has always been Steve's most defining move. It's an incredibly fast counter hit launcher, coming out at 13 frames, serving to interrupt your opponent's pressure and momentum and kill them for it if they even think about pressing where they shouldn't. In this game, this move lost almost all of its recovery frames, meaning it was now essentially impossible for your opponent to whiff punish this if you missed one. This move has also always had a string that went along with it, and you could even get a full combo from this string back in this game, making it very useful to throw people off. Back 1 was the core of Steve's kit in this game, and in addition to that, he had his new down forward 2. This was a ridiculous, safe on block, fully homing, counter hit launching mid that would lead to some of Steve's biggest combos. It had amazing range, and even had some high crushing properties because of how he ducked down. Steve always lacked a tool like this, so getting a fully homing, mid, safe on block counter hit launcher made his neutral light years better. And we're just getting started. Steve's flicker stance, which has always been incredibly important in his toolset, had one of the best counter hit launchers in this game. 1 down 1. You would go into this stance and press 1 and get a basic jab. The jab is -1 on block and a ridiculous +10 on hit. If you saw this jab connect, you had all the time in the world to visually confirm it, and then press the follow-up down 1 for a full counter hit launch, leading to a million damage. This simply put made his poking and counter hit game even more godlike, allowing him to fully hit confirm a counter hit launch from a 12 frame jab that's only -1 on block. He takes no risk and essentially is getting a counter hit launch from a jab. This just made flicker stance so incredibly good. And because there were so many flicker stance setups, you would never want to risk interrupting them because if you throw out this jab, you are going to get counter hit launched. If that's not enough, there's still more counter hit launching strings to talk about, like his shoulder from his right sway stance, being a -5 on block mid that you could easily counter hit confirm into the 2 follow-up for another full launch. I'm actually really surprised how generous the timing is on a lot of this stuff to confirm when you see a counter hit. It's significantly easier than I thought. Steve's classic back 2 also weirdly enough counter hit launches in this game, and is safe on block? Okay. His while standing 2 was 14 frames fast in this game, which is great, and it was also, say it with me guys, safe on block and a counter hit launcher. Are you starting to see a pattern with him? Are you starting to see why people say he had the best counter hit launchers in the entire game? Everything is safe, everything launches, everything is hit confirmable. But let's say in the off chance you were actually struggling to land counter hit launchers, and you wanted to play even more defensively. Well, don't you worry. We have plenty of great defensive options too, like his old school punch parry, which was incredibly strong. It fully launched, and while it did take execution, You could launch your opponent from parrying a simple jab, and these parry combos would do full Steve damage, 100 at minimum. The parry originally wasn't able to launch in the base version of Tekken 6 because he just didn't have a move that could reach far enough and bound after the parry, but in the Tekken 6 console version, they changed his forward 2 to have its hitbox greatly expanded, now allowing you to get a combo from the parry, and also in general giving him an amazing bound tool, allowing for very easy combos from the down forward 2 we mentioned as well. I've seen a lot of people talk about this before, but it's kind of crazy how a small hitbox change can make a character so much better. The main man Sui made a great video going more into detail about this hitbox, so check it out if you're interested. But back to Steve's kit. He also of course had great poking in this game. Steve has always had great poking and it was no different here. His 2-1 string actually used to be a high mid attack, not a high like it is today, so you couldn't duck it. And in this game, it was +3 on block if you went into his crouch stance. High mid strings that are safe are decently uncommon, but ones that are plus on block, this is extremely rare. All of this added up to a top tier Steve, even despite the terrible punishment and weak lows. In my opinion, Steve's actual biggest weakness wasn't even the stuff we mentioned. It was his difficulty. He was and remained an insanely hard character to play, especially at top level. Steve has always been a very complicated character, having the most stances in the game, relying on weaves and perfect stance timing to create constant safe pressure, baiting your opponent into making a mistake, and then using some of his amazing counter hit utility. It's a lot of work, and he had pretty ridiculous execution demands in this game, if you wanted optimal combos and damage. Which kind of begged the question for a lot of players. Why would you put all the time into this character when you could simply pick up Bob and Lars, two characters who are significantly more effective and like 10 times easier? I'm really not exaggerating with that number. This is a problem we would run into a lot more in Tekken 7 and Tekken 8, but it just sucks that some of the hardest, most executionally expressive characters are often overshadowed by these simple, all-encompassing top tiers. Because of this, Steve wasn't seen nearly as often in tournament play, though he would be pulled out occasionally by some classic names, including of course, Knee. Despite the weaknesses, a strong Steve was terrifying in Tekken 6, and absolutely could compete with the best of the best in this game.
On a crash course with Earth, the damage caused by the impact is expected to be devastating. So authorities have declared a state of emergency and will be taking measures to minimize casualties. All residents located near the estimated point of impact are ordered to evacuate immediately.
Now here's one of the most bizarre picks so far. Jack 6 was actually kind of a monster here. While he flew under the radar in the West for most of the game's life, the character was labbed in Korea, and towards the mid half of the game's lifetime was apparently considered an easy top 5 character, maybe even the best character in Korea. And of course, like Korea often is when it comes to Tekken, they were absolutely right. Jack was a very simple character who had one of the most rule-breaking attacks we had seen at that point in Tekken's lifetime. The basics of Jack were almost the same as they are today. He's a very simple character and plays around having a strong backdash, one of the strongest in the game, and very long-range attacks, with his defining down forward 2, the longest range move of its kind back then. He's generally limited by having pretty slow and unsafe normals, and if he wants to get in and apply pressure, he's usually taking some pretty huge risks. Well, in Tekken 6, like I said, he had a god move. This tiny, normal-looking low. At first glance, it doesn't look too strong, right? It looks very visually similar to his down back 1, which is a move Jack has always had, and it's always been pretty strong. Well, suffice it to say, this move broke so many rules. His full crouch down back 1 is an 18 damage low, with good range that is -2 on block. Yes, -2. More safe on block than the average character's down forward 1 mid poke. And this is a fast, unseeable low. Safe on block lows are just incredibly rare in Tekken, and usually when they are, they're compensated by being super slow, so you could easily react, low parry, and get a combo. But not this move. This is actually unfortunately just the start. In addition to the insane -2 on block, it gave a ridiculous +9 on hit. Again, a lot of people don't know frame data, so you might not understand how crazy this is, but +9 is ridiculous. A cool comparison here is that +9 is currently the same amount of plus frames as you get from landing a heat engager in Tekken 8. You know, that animation where after hitting one of your most powerful attacks, you run in at them in their face? This low would give the same plus frames as a heat engager in Tekken 8. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. These plus frames are so egregious that he can actually do a second one after the first one hits that is 100% uninterruptible, allowing him to loop this pressure. And you know what else was uninterruptible after this move hit? Oh, his while-standing 4, a safe on block mid for 25 damage. This simple 50-50 doesn't seem like a lot to most people, but actually created some of the most oppressive wall pressure we've ever seen in the Tekken series. A lot of jacks would just use the full crouch down back 1 and mix in while-standing 4 over and over and over at the wall, taking zero risk. And this, coupled with him having one of the best mids in the entire game, in his forward 4, which is a safe on block, 42 damage wall splatting attack, made his wall game objectively the best in the game. If he thought for even a second you were trying to duck or low parry one of these lows that he was spamming at your face, you would get splatted into the wall, and then would take around 110 damage, over 60% of your life bar, as Jack had the best wall bound damage in the entire game. This sequence alone that we've just talked about was absolutely spammed by Jack players, and honestly alone made him a top tier character. These frames were just too oppressive, it was too much for a move to have all this. Of course, in addition to the wall stuff, like I mentioned, Jack had exceptionally high damage in general. Even without the wall, he was getting tons of damage. I mentioned a little bit earlier that throws were harder to break in this game, so naturally, Jack had a perfect throw game. He had a throw for every single break, he had a wall splatting throw, which led to over 100 damage if he didn't break the throw, pretty insane, and a regular launching throw that would give him a full combo no matter where you were on the stage. He was actually considered by many to have an even better throw game than the wrestler duo King and Armor King, which is pretty hilarious considering that's their whole identity, right? A lot of people after hearing all these things we've mentioned about Jack would have suggested try sidestepping to counter some of this insane stuff. So far, none of the moves we've mentioned accounted for sidesteps. Almost all of this stuff can be sidestepped pretty easily, so maybe we found an actual weakness here, right? Alas, we have not. Jack had his 1+2, which was considered by a lot of pro players to be the best homing move in Tekken 6, coming out ridiculously fast at 16 frames, being fully homing, and it was safe on block. It also even had a follow-up that went into a full high-crushing launcher, so a lot of people after blocking this would try and jab to take their turn back. If they did anything like this, you would launch them and get a full combo. The main utility of this 1+2 was, of course, at the wall. Because of the crippling plus frames the full crouch low would give him, this homing move was also uninterruptible after landing a low, meaning anyone who foolishly tried to sidewalk to get away from the wall would get clipped by this move, and then the whole situation would start up all over again. When fighting Jack in Tekken 6, you had to put everything into not getting hit by one of his launchers, because once he had you at the wall, you might as well forfeit the round. Even besides all the crazy wall stuff, there was a lot of classic Jack attributes that he had going for him. A great backdash, as he's always had, and a great range mid in his down forward too, serving to reward players with strong defense. If you had good movement, you could get a lot of value just whiff punishing with down forward too. His forward 1 was a lot better in this game as it is today, being a very fast mid that was safe, it did a ton of damage, and in this game and this game only, would actually bound your opponent if it caught anyone in the air. So if you thought your opponent would hop kick or use an orbital, you could get a combo from this. It would also clip your opponent if they were trying to get up off the ground, which was a pretty great attribute for this move to have. It really didn't need all that. But yeah, that's really it for Jack. An incredibly simple character who just had such insanely overtuned frame data on seemingly normal attacks, it made him arguably the best character in the game. Bryan Fury, just like Steve, was incredible in Tekken 5, and also had a great transition to Tekken 6, despite being nerfed in a lot of ways. Almost in every way, but he of course remained top tier, which is really a testament to how strong he was before. This was the first game where the true taunt jet upper, considered the pinnacle of modern Bryan execution, was added. Prior to this game, it was actually very easy to pull off because of how many extra plus frames Bryan's taunt used to give. For those of you who don't know, Bryan has a taunt, which is essentially an unblockable attack that gives him significant plus frames so he can get some guaranteed hits. In Tekken 6, the taunt was nerfed to now give plus 16, the same as it is today, compared to the plus 18 in Tekken 5 that it used to give. These 2 frames might not seem like a big difference, but they absolutely are. See, after a taunt, a Bryan player can input a jet upper and get a guaranteed launch from this unblockable taunt. In Tekken 5, it was pretty lenient, but in Tekken 6, because of the frame nerfs, it was officially frame perfect, again, the same way it is today. Extremely difficult to do, but if you could pull it off, you basically have a 28 frame unblockable launcher that does devastating damage. If you play Bryan, you probably know that going for a taunt jet upper is pretty unrealistic for most people, with the majority of Bryans instead opting for the easier, albeit still very difficult, taunt back 4. This is what makes Bryan's wall game so oppressive to this day, and it all started here in Tekken 6. After knocking your opponent down to the wall, usually after a combo, you dash forward and then press 1+3+4 to start the taunt animation as your opponent is trying to get to their feet. If they got up in any way, this unblockable would pretty much always connect, and if you had good enough execution, you would press back 4 into jet upper. This makes this little unblockable that's essentially guaranteed at the wall now wall splat for 110 damage. Devastating stuff, and it wasn't uncommon for Bryan players in this game to land one single combo, get you to the wall, and then hit a taunt. And that was it. The round is now over. Try again next time. GG. It was even more ridiculous in Tekken 5, back when pretty much anyone could do this. At least in this game, they made it incredibly executionally demanding. Still, it led to some of the best wall pressure in the game, but you had to at least earn it first. So, after getting splatted against the wall, what do you do if you don't want to get hit by the taunts? Well, there is one answer to this, and that is, and remains today, to stay down at the wall and wait. Stay on the ground. This was the most common option in pro play, because it just isn't worth tech rolling and risking losing the entire round to an unblockable. The problem is that any good Bryan player is going to consider this. If you knew your opponent wasn't going to tech roll after the combo ends, you could actually extend the combo, getting a guaranteed 3+4 at the wall after your regular combo, turning a 110 damage juggle into 130 damage. You could also simply just wait and use Bryan's various built-in Oki tools to harass your opponent for staying down. Back sway 4, the classic soccer kick, is great at this, and so is his down 4 low. Basically, Tekken 6 was the first game that really cemented Bryan's ridiculous wall pressure. You're just always in a terrible situation against him. And that's without even mentioning that he has one of the best wall combos in the game, up there with Steve and Lars. If you didn't want to learn the taunt execution for optimal follow-ups, Bryan actually had an easy execution option off of the taunt. Pretty similar to how it is today in Tekken 8, where they've given him Taunt Heat Smash, which is a very lenient and simple way to utilize his taunts if you're a less experienced player. In this game, it was Taunt 1+2. Super easy to do, you couldn't mess it up, and you'd get an easy 40 damage. So he had lots of options going from the newest Bryan players to the most technically proficient players. Okay, so obviously the taunt is godly, but let's move on to that. This was the game where Bryan arguably was given some of his best tools in general. His 3+4, the long-range counter-hit launcher we all know today, was officially added in this game, though it was mostly just an input change. This is an amazing move for keep out, and just like it is today, it's a super long range, safe on block due to pushback, counter-hit launcher. If you press into Bryan, you are dying. This move defined his neutral. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but Bryan had some of the highest combo damage in the game, and he benefited from the bounce system more than pretty much any other character I can think of. They gave him a string which was designed for very easy and efficient wall travel, meaning that after hitting a launcher, you're able to get some of the best wall travel in the game without even using your bound. Why is this noteworthy? Well, as I mentioned previously, you could bound at the wall in this game, making Tekken 6 stand out a lot more, as this was removed in Tekken Tag 2 and Tekken 7. This naturally allowed for much higher damage combos, so the best Bryan players in the world would abuse this and try and save their bound for the wall, into his taunt wall pressure. Not fun to deal with. Bryan, of course, still had his back 1, being a plus on block mid counter-hit launcher. He had his while standing 3 and sway 3 being amazing up-close counter-hit launchers to prevent your opponent from pressing at all. And with all this being said, you can see how Bryan got his identity as a counter-hit character. Honestly, his counter-hit launchers were matched only really by Steve, and technically Bruce. Every other character just had worse counter-hit launchers than him. But okay, all of this stuff you pretty much know. Let's talk about the Tekken 6 specific stuff on this guy. His forward 4 was actually a great tool in this game, being a super long range, safe on block mid. On counter hit, it would knock your opponent down and put them in a terrible situation. If they did anything besides tech roll, you would actually be able to get a free jet upper for a full launch. And if they tech rolled, you would walk up and be at a big frame advantage. But the best part of this move was at the wall, where on counter hit, it would give a guaranteed taunt setup, which was very strong. Bryan just had so many of these Oki setups in general. If you want even more setups, Bryan had a punch parry in this game, his down forward 1+2. This was safe on block and would automatically parry any punches that came his way during the move's startup. Even without the parry, it did 32 damage on regular hits, and either gave a follow-up or various tech traps that your opponent really did not want to deal with. Hopefully you're seeing now that Bryan was kind of an Oki setup god back in Tekken 6, who also hit like a truck. His combos were high damage, but a lot of his other individual moves also kind of did broken damage, like his sidestep 1, which is a safe on block high that did 39 damage on normal hit, while knocking down into a guaranteed soccer kick for 64 damage from a random safe sidestep high. Okay, wow. One of his most iconic homing moves, his 1+2, was very different in Tekken 6. It was 14 frames fast, making it quite a bit faster than it is today, with the cost of it being -10. These days, it's actually safe on block, so you gain a little and you lose a little bit in the Tekken 6 version of this move. It being faster is arguably better though, as you could use it to check your opponent's stepping way easier. And despite being punishable on block, people really didn't like to punish this because of the classic 2 follow-up that was always there. This move was also kind of broken on counter hits. It flipped your opponent around, opening up some really interesting setups, though most of these aren't actually guaranteed. So I'd say this move is a lot better in this game than it is today. A general weakness of Bryan is being pretty weak up close. He usually doesn't have the best poking, but this really wasn't a problem here. Of course, he has the very unconventional down forward 1, which comes out at 15 frames, and can be used up to 4 times in succession. If you know Bryan, I'm sure you know all about this move. In my opinion at least, this move is godly, both today and back here in Tekken 6. The whole thing is designed around a mind game. If you do anything more than the first punch, it's unsafe at -10, but your opponent doesn't know how many hits of it you're going to do, and because the string is very easy to hit confirm, if they let go of block at any time and try to punish it and the Bryan decides to keep going, you're always able to confirm the string and finish it off, doing a ton of damage. Knee has been playing down forward 1 mind games on Bryan for over 20 years. The difference in Tekken 6 compared to today is that the risk reward is very skewed in the Bryan player's favor. In Tekken 8, if you finish the full down forward 1 string with a 2 ender, you're -15, launch punishable. It sounds pretty fair. However, in Tekken 6, you're actually only -10, meaning these tiny little punches have the same safety as the big mid final hits. This served to, in my opinion at least, make the string significantly better, helping his up close game a lot. The down forward 1 is an absolute standout, but it is still 15 frames, meaning it's not the greatest for a quick mid poke. Luckily, Bryan has also always had his down forward 2, which fills the role of a quick mid poke very nicely. It's a 13 frame fast move, and usually is quite minus on block, but it has a follow-up that counter hit launches. That's how it works today in Tekken 8. In Tekken 6, he gave up the extension that counter hit launched. It didn't exist yet, so instead, all he had from this move is a high follow-up that, for some reason, jailed. You can't actually duck the high in this game, and the high is only -4, which essentially made his down forward 2 only -4 on block instead of the intended -8, making this a pretty great tool and definitely worth the trade-off. He of course still had the classic 14 frame down forward 2, which does have a counter hit launching follow-up, and let's not forget 1-2-1, one of the only high mid strings that is not only safe, but launches on counter hits. Not bad poking by any means. He had some good stuff in this game. Of course, Bryan had his iconic orbital, which is always an amazing defensive tool, acting as a full safe evasive launcher, and everything else you could think of is pretty much here and accounted for. His lows were weaker in this game than they are today, with the hatchet kick in particular being one of his best lows today, actually being -14 on block in this game compared to today's 12. That's a big difference, and quite a few characters could launch you for it. It's also only +2 on hit in this game, which is not the greatest. His punishment was also weaker than it is today, as this was before he was given a really strong 13 frame standing and crouching punisher. However, in my opinion, you absolutely cannot call his punishment weak. He has the classic jet upper, which is a 14 frame bufferable standing launcher, and any character with a 14 frame launcher is going to have pretty good punishment in my book. And of course a regular 15 frame launcher from while standing if he blocked your lows. He is far from Steve when it comes to punishment. This is a good set of tools. So yeah, Bryan was really the complete package. There's even a couple stuff I haven't mentioned yet, like how he has some of the best movement in the game, how his Snake Edge, the slow normal hit low launcher, was 27 frames in this game, making it the fastest Snake Edge ever at this point in time. The speed of this move combined with Tekken 6 being the first Tekken game to have online play, and I'm sure you can guess what's coming. The netcode was horrid. Even the best conditions were very slow and laggy, which of course meant it was significantly harder to react to anything online. You already know Bryan players online would abuse this. It was not fun dealing with the Snake Edge in online connections. So, Bryan was pretty great in this game. He was much more fair to fight compared to his Tekken 5 counterpart, while still being broken in many ways. All I can say for now is this. Just wait for the Tekken 5 video, because this isn't Bryan at his strongest. Far from it.
You guys cover me. Lower your weapons! Lower your weapons! Don't move! Bruce here. Area cleared. It looks like I won the bet. Over.
Bruce Irvin hadn't really been having the best time before Tekken 6. He was incredibly weak in Tekken 5 and in Tekken 5 DR, to the point where he was almost a joke. Luckily, the Tekken team showed him a ton of love in this new era, and he would be a top tier character both in Tekken 6 and in Tekken Tag 2, before getting cut from the roster. I'm still hoping we see Bruce return in the DLC for Tekken 8, though it's a little bit more unlikely with Fulcrum Ram returning. Anyway, Tekken 6 was the game where Bruce became the counter-hit and damage monster everyone knows him as today. Much like Bryan, to be honest. Though Bruce actually did even more damage than Bryan here in Tekken 6. His whole kit would revolve around Back 2, one of the absolute best counter-hit launchers and neutral moves in general. It had huge range and pushback on block, was completely safe, and on regular hit would knock down for a guaranteed follow-up, doing 53 total damage. 53 damage from a safe, huge range normal hit mid. And it got so much worse on counter hits, leading to some of his most damaging combos. Sometimes if you got hit by a back 2, you would just take 120 damage from a single combo, and if he had rage, you were most likely dead. This amazing counter hit launching mid, combined with his crouch dash, yes, he had a crouch dash type stance, led to a pretty goofy 50-50. His go-to low was his crouch dash 3, and it was kind of ridiculous in this game. It was one of the longest range lows in Tekken, and it did 30 damage on regular hits, being +4, and laughably was only -12 on block. For context, Bryan's hatchet kick in this game was -14 and only +2 on hits. This is basically an infinitely better hatchet kick. In Tag 2, it would become -14, which was an insane nerf. -14 means there's quite a few characters who are going to consistently launch you if they block it, but this was definitely not a problem here in Tekken 6. Just playing around this low in Back 2 was a pretty damn good strategy, and is one of the reasons Bruce was considered a very easy character to play. Despite these two pretty overtuned moves, he definitely had more stuff. He had a great Magic 4 counter hit launcher, a highly evasive safe high launcher in his back 1+2, which would just beat out your opponent's attacks super easily. And if you guys know anything about competitive play, you know evasion is very, very important. He also had sidestep 1+2, another safe on block mid counter hit launcher, because why not? And he had many other good normal hit mid launchers. Quite a few of the normal hit launchers were -10, but they were still really strong, and the risk reward would always be in your favor. We haven't mentioned Bruce's wall travel yet either. He had some of the best wall travel in the game, much like Bryan. When you fought against a good Bruce, pretty much no matter where you were on the stage, if there were walls, you were going straight to them. Bruce's punishment was also surprisingly strong. He is one of the best 10-frame punishers in the game in his 143, doing a whopping 34 damage from a 10-frame punish. And he had arguably the best 12-frame punisher in the game, which would wall splats. And as you can see from this clip, if you had rage, you could take around 150 damage from a 12-frame punish. He also had a good normal 15-frame down forward 2 to launch his opponents, and had a 13-frame while standing launcher. Well, sort of. It wouldn't become a full big combo launcher until Tekken Tag 2, but in this game, still gave a mini juggle, and allowed you to wall splat if you were close enough. Very good punishment here. Besides that, something I don't see people mention enough when they talk about Bruce in these older games is that the majority of his attacks are built around elbows and knees, which is super helpful in this game considering how many strong parries there are. If you didn't know, elbows and knees can't be parried by traditional parries, so this allows you to not really have to worry about a lot of shenanigans like Lars' auto DSS parry or Bryan's parry. And this allowed you to punish flowcharting players really heavily. But okay, let's talk about some other lows. Besides the crouch dash low I mentioned, he had some other pretty decent stuff, like his down back 3+4, which was a counter hit launching low that was only -11 on block. And if you knew the proper combo, you could get around 100 damage from this. A counter hit launching low that's -11 is not something we see very often. They're almost always -14, if not easily launch punishable, but Bruce didn't have to worry about that, leading to some pretty stupid risk reward. Speaking of stupid risk reward, why have any risk at all? His down forward 3 is a safe on block low. It was quite slow to be fair, but still, it has full high crush. Why are we giving multiple characters in this game safe on block lows? Lows like this are especially strong in the Tekken 6 engine, as low parries, which is normally the counterplay to lows that are very safe, were pretty weak. You were unable to bound during a combo like you could in Tekken Tag 2 and Tekken 7. Bruce's biggest weakness was in the poking department. His down forward 1 came out at a ridiculously slow 16 frames, meaning it was almost never used. Instead, you would use standing 3, a long-range 13-frame mid-check, but this was far from a great poking tool. It was very quick and had great range, but you're giving up your turn at a -8, though you could cancel it into a crouch dash for some interesting mind games. His best mid poke in my opinion is his crouch dash 1, which came out at 12 frames. Though again, being locked behind crouch dash isn't the greatest for a generic poke. Despite the fact that the move did have a couple of interesting and gimmicky extensions to throw your opponent off guard. Having quick and safe pokes was a big weakness for Bruce, but if you were willing to take a little bit of risk, things opened up a lot, like through his back 1, an 11 frame high that has another high follow-up. Generally in Tekken, using any high string is pretty risky because it can be ducked. However, if you were willing to take that risk and you knew your opponent wouldn't duck, the move became pretty great, having a third extension that was fully delayable and counter hit confirmable. It ended in a mid that would make the string actually wall splat for pretty disgusting damage. And the best part was that the whole sequence starting with back 1 was natural on counter hits, making it a great 11 frame counter hit tool. Again though, it was risky, as you did have to commit to the second high before being able to confirm the mid. Overall, Bruce was a great character in Tekken 6, and filled the counter hit based character niche pretty nicely if you were looking for an easier option than Steve or Bryan. I really do hope we get to see this guy again in a modern Tekken game, because if we're being real, he's just the coolest.
Cheers! Yeah! All thanks to you, Steve.
It's ready! My special recipe pizza!
It's about time.
It looks delicious.
This is good. No!
Prior to Tekken 8, Law was considered one of the most technical characters in the entire series, and this was largely because of the famous DSS, Dragon Sign Stance, and its myriad of transitions and cancels that gave Law his identity. This stance revolved around a mechanic where certain Law moves could be transitioned normally into the DSS stance by pressing back, forward at the exact same time your move connects. This allowed for some of the most insane combo extensions we've ever seen in Tekken, and of course, Law's signature ridiculous block pressure, making some moves that would normally be unsafe and even punishable on block actually now become plus and in the Law player's favor. There's plenty of other videos going way further into depth on this stance, but that's the gist of it. It was super technical and hard to do, but if you could do it, it would open up Law to become one of the most creative pressure-based characters in the game. While this was only removed in Tekken 8, Law actually lost some other stuff in Tekken 7 and Tag 2. Tekken 6 was the last game where Law had his auto parry mechanic in this stance, where for the first few frames of transitioning into DSS, he would automatically parry attacks. This actually kind of returned in Tekken 8, with him now having an auto parry whenever he's in heat mode, but it's not nearly as useful today as it was back then in Tekken 6. The most technical Law players on the planet worked incredibly hard at optimizing all the DSS stuff, and eventually would get to the point where you would be forced to respect Law's DSS transitions, because if you didn't and tried to check it, you would almost always get parried, which meant losing your turn and taking a ton of damage. As I'm sure you can imagine, this is an incredible strength. A character being able to punish you for like 40 damage when you thought it was your turn to get a punish is kind of insane. Pretty rule-breaking stuff, although again, this was not easy to do, and required very good timing and awareness from the Law player. The parry by itself was so good that it alone was enough to make Law considered a great character. Although he wouldn't be as popular in tournaments because again, he's so difficult, and why spend all this time labbing such a difficult character when you can just play one of the easy top tiers who are even more effective for 10 times less effort. Besides the parry though, Law in Tekken 6 was the same as he is today, a very all-around character. He had excellent counter hit utility, having the fastest possible Magic 4 in Tekken, coming out at 11 frames, and of course being a full counter hit launcher. This is especially relevant because his 4-3, a very common high string that Law has even today, was actually jailing in this game, meaning you weren't able to duck the second high if the first one connected. This allowed for some pretty great pressure and poking, especially because it was +7 on block if you DSS cancelled off of it, and of course was a counter hit launcher. Yeah, a pretty ridiculous Magic 4, all things considered. The iconic Law forward 1+2 was still here, and it was as great as it always has been, being a plus on block counter hit launching mid that also forced your opponent into crouch, and a lot of people still don't know it, but Law can also choose to go into crouch after you block this move, which opens up his amazing crouch mix-ups. If you ever pressed into this move, you were going for a ride, and were probably going to lose over half of your health bar. Law also had one of the best while-running attacks in the game in his while-running 3. This was +17 on block in this game, meaning if you blocked this mid attack, there was literally nothing you could do but take a guess. In this game, it also guaranteed a down back 3 every time it hit, which we haven't seen again since, giving him a nice extra chunk of damage for this already really strong move. Although, Tekken 6 was before while-running attacks were heavily simplified like they are today in Tekken 8. These days, doing a while-running attack when you're right next to your opponent is stupid easy. You literally just have to press forward 3 times. But before Tekken 8, it was actually very executionally demanding if you wanted to do it quickly in your opponent's face. So this added more execution to Law's stuff. If you put in the time on this character, you would be pretty heavily rewarded. Law, of course, also had his signature amazing crouch mix-up game, having the almighty slide. Let's be honest, it wouldn't be Law without this move. The slide has always been an incredible low, having some of the best range in the entire game, and while, yes, it is risky, it's a great tool to have to keep your opponent guessing and almost force a constant mind game. You never know when a Law is going to pull the trigger and do a slide. Of course, this crouching low wouldn't be strong unless he had plenty of mids to mix it up with, and of course, he absolutely did. Newer players would use Law's while standing 2 for 50-50, which was essentially the exact same as it is today. It's his 15-frame while standing launcher that is unsafe on block. However, you do not have to take risks on Law. If you wanted safety, he had amazing pokes from crouch that could all be DSS cancelled for huge plus frames. While standing 4, for example, a mid kick that's +5 on block if cancelled properly into DSS. And of course, he also had the high variation in while standing 3, also being a +5 on block. His while standing 1-2 string was also super good in this game. It was a 13-frame fast string that is fully counter hit confirmable, meaning you would just press the first hit and you would have plenty of time to visually see if your opponent pressed into it, and then follow up with the second hit. Or, if you were good enough to do it, you could actually just do both hits of the string on block, and then DSS cancel to attempt an auto parry to cheese your opponent. If that's not enough, the string knocked down for a guaranteed follow-up. Really great mid here. Outside of his crouch stance, he just had really solid defining neutral tools. His old back 3 was great, a huge mid-homing kick, which, while technically being unsafe on block, was actually made safe due to its pushback, and this move would do around 30 damage and knockdown on a regular hit. A pretty great homing move to add to Law's arsenal to ensure no one is trying to sidestep him. Of course, a classic Law move we have to talk about is the sidestep 3+4. It was quite different in this game, being a very highly damaging move and knocking down for tons of guaranteed follow-ups on regular hits. The move was designed around being unsafe on block, but just like the back 3, could also be safe if you learned how to space it properly, though this was actually pretty difficult to do consistently. Of course, a lot of the strongest top tiers in Tekken have a quick down forward 2 launcher, and Law had that, 15 frames fast and completely safe on block, even having a little bit of high crush. If you like throws, Law had a launching throw, and hopefully you're starting to see how much of a complete package Law was. The poking utility on Law was there as well. He had lots of strings and lots of safe mid tools that would cover sidesteps very well, like his back 1 and back 2. Both of these tracked to his weak side, and were core parts of the character's neutral. His great safe 1-2-3 string ending in a mid would actually wall splat on counter hit in this game, which is a huge deal. It doesn't do that anymore. Down back 3 is an amazing low for poking, as it always is, and this is just a super complete character. He lacked some of the more flashy stuff the characters above him had, and he was definitely held back a little bit by his execution demands if you wanted to play optimal Law, but the DSS auto parry really made up for it. It forced anyone, no matter how strong of a player they were, or how good their character was, to respect Law or risk getting reversaled. A really cool iteration of the character, and I'm hoping in future Tekken games we start to bring Law back towards being a more expert and specialist-based character, instead of whatever he is today. These characters were far from the only top tiers in Tekken 6. Julia was a super tricky and oppressive character, Devil Jin was still going strong during his reign as the king of the Mishimas, Armor King was awesome in this game. There's plenty I didn't talk about, but I feel like I chose a good selection of the game's most defining top tiers. Honestly, before researching for this video, I didn't really know a ton about Tekken 6, and I'm so glad I decided to take the time to learn and really appreciate it. If you ask me, this is by far the most well-balanced Tekken game. Yeah, the top tiers were oppressive, but almost every character we talked about today had some kind of weakness, and that balance philosophy is largely lacking in modern Tekken games. I know people really hated Bob and Lars back in these days, but at least from the outside looking in, they seem far more fair to fight than anything we've gotten in Tekken 8. This game represents a simpler time in Tekken's life, and I'm honestly surprised more people don't talk about this game. It feels like when the good old days of Tekken are mentioned, this game is often just brushed off in favor of Tag 2 or Tekken 5. Hopefully this video serves to remind people that Tekken 6 was undoubtedly a great Tekken game as well, and deserves to stand amongst the best. Anyway, that's more than enough yapping from me. If you guys enjoyed the video and want to support me, please consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing if you aren't already. It really goes a long way in letting me know you enjoy this type of stuff and want to see more videos like it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in Tekken 5.